It's fantastic to see you both, Lindsay and Paul. I'm joined by two fabulous fellow Positive Momentum partners, and I thought we'd just have a quick chat about centres of excellence. And we all, three of us, come at it from slightly different angles, as you'll find out. So, without further ado, let's just get into introducing my co-collaborators, Lindsay and Paul. Lindsay, you first. By way of introduction of yourself, perhaps you could just share briefly a snapshot of your experience with these things called centres of
Centres
excellence.
of excellence. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Jules. So, yeah, centres of excellence, primarily in my working life, it was when I was with Icono Insight, part of the IKEA group of companies, and working within the bank organisation, we took a decision to bring together all the capabilities from across the European and Nordic markets in the UK to focus around the strategic direction, CRM, customer insight, and analytics. There was a real desire to want to drive that capability across the organisation. And with it being federated out in the local markets, that wasn't happening. So my experience was, if you like, setting up, running that organisation over a period of 3 years. So I saw the pain points, the real impact that it can have, and yeah, it's a couple of things I can share with you later in the conversation, but that's the main area in my working life. And then I guess subsequently in consulting, we come across it every day in different organizations in different shapes and sizes. Primarily I see a lot within the sales enablement arena, so those two areas for me.
Very good. Well, we're going to dig into lots of your nuggets, which I know are just waiting to be sought out in the next half hour or so. Paul, you come at it from a slightly different angle with 2 decades plus of deep learning and development experience.
Yeah, so my career started originally in consulting, working with lots of organizations, and one of the most important questions they always had was, how do we actually drive ROI on the back of our investments in learning and development? And creating a way of capturing best practice and being able to duplicate best practice is obviously one of the easiest ways of demonstrating and capturing ROI, because it means that far beyond any investment and time spent with the consultants, actually the impact continues. And we used to always talk about how do we make that tail, the tail of that impact much longer. And then I spent more than a decade at organizations as an employee, sort of running training and development places like Virgin Media. And again, we would do a lot of programs. Every program we would just describe as a blend. How do you take whatever we're teaching, whatever capability we're driving into the organization, how do we bring that tail? How do we make sure through coaching, through resources, through capturing best practice? So that could be with management skills, that could be across the sales organization, customer service, every possible area of different organizations. And there's an opportunity to make the most of our investments in learning and development by capturing best practice and helping to drive a sustained change. And then as a consultant, since being with PM, it's an active part of probably every one of my engagements in all sorts of different environments.
Yeah, interesting. We talk a lot about embedding the capability, don't we? And then we also try to talk a little bit about not being that annoying piece of sellotape which you just can't get off your finger, and making ourselves go away, and so that you can just crack on and get on with it. And I suppose to some extent, the center of excellence is a device to enable that to happen after we've gone. So here's a question for you both. The name aside, because that might also be a bit of a trigger phrase, center of excellence. What is a center of excellence, and why is it important for businesses? Lindsay, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I see it as very much being the catalyst, if you like, whatever shape or form, whether it's 60 people, 100 people too, it's that catalyst for driving innovation, development, best practice around a particular capability. And I think quite often where you see centre of excellence is it's a capability that may be within the business underlying somewhere, but it allows you to bring it up to a higher level and create some focus on it. So for me, if it's a capability, if we talk about it as a capability, it's about how to do things better, faster, quicker, and keeping an organisation ahead. But more importantly, it's got to be something that's aligned to the strategic goals of the business, because if it's not, it will just get lost. So something that's very much aligned to that, and that's going to really help drive a capability forwards. That's how I see it.
And yeah, and that capability could be anything. In your case, it was data
Yeah.
analytics, CRM functions,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But you can
Yeah.
have it in finance, you can have it in product
Leadership,
innovation,
training.
yeah, my
Yeah.
sales enablement, my direct deep experience was within newsroom transformation, which I know is a little bit niche, but still it is about a digital transformation and a change of mindset,
Yeah.
and federating that. Paul, what do you think of the? I mean, where have you encountered a centre of excellence? Maybe even if it wasn't called that.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's always about determining what best practice looks like, and then looking at how you duplicate that. That might be capturing. There's been a whole discussion for probably about 15 years around this idea of social learning, enabling people to share best practice. Largely, in my experience, that hasn't worked, because what wasn't taken into consideration was the fact that individuals don't feel that confident to put themselves out there as someone with knowledge and experience they're willing to share. So what I found, so centers of excellence for me are all about defining what we're trying to achieve. So, for example, within management or within sales capability, to your point, Lindsey, it's about what is the capability that's going to drive the outcome. And then ideally, and I won't name the organization, but I do remember doing a senior leadership program for an organization that had, would you believe, 6,000 senior leaders. And our very first question in that program was, talk to us about your high performing leaders. And they said, oh, we don't have any. I'm like, okay, there's an organization as big as you doesn't have any capable leaders. That's interesting. So it worked for me. It's based on the assumption that we've got high performers in the business. We need to better understand what they're doing, and we need to be able to capture what they're doing, both in development activities, that might be online resources, that might be coaching, etc., but also in ways of working. How do we streamline the way that other people can work to duplicate what our highest performers are doing? And then putting a system around that so that we can keep evolving what that content and what that way of working looks like, to make sure it stays up with whatever changes we encounter.
Yeah, evolving, critical word, which I'm so glad you said there, Paul, because while you build the structure, it's not necessarily an ivory tower, is it? Big, and yes, you might build in some high performance or some subject matter experts, or and there is an element which is a kind of broadcast and semi top down, but actually the real value of a center of excellence, when it's working its best, is absorption as well, isn't it? And the tentacles out into the organization, understanding what stuff that a distant team, maybe the other side of the Atlantic, is doing, which actually is really, really good, and everyone else should know about it. And it comes back to your point about confidence, that lots of individuals, there are clearly lots of individuals who just will tell anybody anything and do anything to increase their personal equity, but there are others who don't necessarily feel confident, one, about sharing that, but then there's also there's also a bravery about opening yourself up to improvement as well. So there's quite a lot of people stuff in there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I would say the people stuff was one of the biggest challenges, and the most pleasurable part of when I was setting that up. And I think how you get people to see what the governance is going to be, what their roles and responsibilities are going to be, both for the people doing it, but also those consuming it. So in the instance that I was working with centres of excellence, all of a sudden an organisation in the local market who had responsibility for that capability or that resource became centralised. So you've got that change to navigate actually on what's the expectation of this centre of excellence, what's it going to bring differently to me, and how do I enable the people and the team to bring that difference to the market and to the organisation. So actually it wasn't just about the people within it, it was actually those around the organisation and stakeholder management that was absolutely critical for making it work. Because the minute you say centre of excellence, the expectation goes up. people expect something 10 times better than what they've had it previously before, and you've got to show the pathway to that and manage that expectation and demonstrate the impact of it. So I mean, unpacking people was quite a complex part of it, actually, because it wasn't just the expertise of the team itself, it was how you work with the rest of the organisation and collaborate and bring the two-way input on changing needs of what that team do that was critical, actually. And for me, it's probably like any other major change or transformation program where you've got organisational change. The importance of that and getting people to buy into that and understand that and have a voice in it was perhaps the biggest challenge for me in all of it, and also the most successful part of it, because as you talked about evolve, Jules, the evolution of the people and expectations keep changing as well, so you've got to keep going on with that and having dialogue. So yeah, people, massive part of it, actually, probably the biggest part for me in my experience. But
yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I sometimes, if I'm honest, I sometimes feel like we overcomplicate what it is that we're asking people to do. So going back to this point that you've got people in all sorts of sort of different areas of an organization. So and how do we give them a voice, but at the same time, how do we have the confidence in a center of excellence to go, you know, look, we've looked around the organization, and for this particular capability, this is, we believe, the most optimum way of doing it. And we're going to have the confidence to actually say that. So, for example, I was rolling out a kind of this part of an organization's change towards a more coaching culture. You could ask one of 20,000 people within this business, you know, how they go about coaching. And there were some brilliant examples of coaching. And we'll all know, for those of us that have had the pleasure of going on multiple coaching diplomas, there's 1,000 different ways of coaching. So at what point do you go, actually, we in this context, we've worked out that actually, so in a very large news organization, we ended up teaching coaching as 3 questions, because we realized you can't teach everybody to be a coach. So our base minimum is if we get people to ask these 3 questions in their one-to-one, that will drive a better outcome and a better quality coaching conversation than if we don't. So I think sometimes it's partly this, as Lindsey mentioned, the need to manage the change and make sure that we've involved everybody so you increase engagement and buy-in. But there's also a role that people within a centre of excellence play to then curate what they've learned and be confident to go, this is best practice and this is what we're going to double down on.
Yeah. That's so, it's very interesting, and it's so lovely of you to enable me to bring in a editorial analogy as well, because obviously from my background, but so much of learning development is actually is content management and content editorship as well, isn't it? And this notion of so being we talked about, so being super clear about what the goals are, being very clear about what's expected from inside the center of excellence, but also being really clear on, you know, what is the opportunity to input into it, so what people get out of the center of excellence as well, and that editorship. So you start with a view, but you've also got to reserve the right to evolve that view as well, because the whole point of this thing is that we innovate. We're on a continuous journey of innovation, and being able to spot, oh, that's brilliant, that's going to really, you know, that actually, let's evolve, let's build that in, this notion of growing and adapting. And that's actually a really, you know, as if change wasn't hard enough, managing change upon change can get a bit kind of confusing for people, can't it?
Yeah. And I think you both said there, actually, the clarity of what are the practices, and being really clear and writing those down. So what is expected of me as an individual? And, you know, it's like any other organization. If you were thinking about a business strategy, very clear purpose, very clear practices of what you need to do, and also some principles of guidance around how you work. So you know, one of our principles was around very much about collaboration, and it was about thinking about everyone you work with as a customer, because we're here to do a job for the rest of the organization, and having some very clear principles and guidelines on how to work as well, not just what you do, but how to do it. And I think particularly where you're in a complex matrix organization that we were, you've got to have that to navigate the ways of working, because that can derail everything when it comes down to the people side of it and having an impact. But and you talked a bit about sort of, I guess you got the purpose, but the impact piece is critical. And we sort of started quite small, building case studies. And I think this is the other piece around really showing the way of how you're making a difference. Don't start with these massive, KPIs that you're just constantly striving after, but start small, start with case studies. And we got the markets to work with us on case studies of, here's an example of a model that we've delivered, and look at the impact that it had for their client in that particular market, and start building stories around it, which I know, Jules, you love talking about stories, but the storytelling of the impact, I think, is really important as well, and get the team to be able to articulate that in a way starts to build the noise about the benefits of it, rather than just some high convoluted KPIs that you're looking at.
So we've talked quite a bit about, before we even start, why do you even want to set one up, and launching it, and then Paul, just tell us a little bit about what would you do in order to keep it going and to grow it. Let's talk a little bit more about that kind of evolution. How does a centre of excellence evolve?
I suppose it depends on the context. So if I think about management centres of excellence, often, as we know, a lot of managers haven't had core management skills training. So it's enough actually to start with what are the core principles. So at a very large kind of internet service provider here in the UK, one of the roles there was to drive basically core management competence across the organisation. And it was enough for us to say, actually, we know what good management competence looks like. We're going to build a centre of excellence, and then we're going to coach and support people to adopt that. And how we, and then the question there is, in terms of how it evolves, it's more about how do you see that adoption, and how do you see that capability? How do you manage that capability, and how do you ensure that what has been invested in terms of that centre of excellence, that management toolkit, as in a way, how do you ensure that that's being utilised and made the most of, but also that there is this feedback loop, so you can see where things might need to evolve. So I think in some instances, it's the evolution is more about adoption than it is the continuous improvement of the materials. But in other instances, certainly within sales organisations, like to your point, Lindsey, you've tended to start really small. It's exactly what I'm doing at the moment with an organisation. Start really small and say, where are the main pain points within that sales process that if we double down on and we make that simpler, we capture best practice and we drive capability, we're going to see a measurable shift in people's sales performance. Okay, now that becomes our comms story, because no one's now going to start questioning the value of this continuous process, because we're demonstrating the returns on investment right from the start. And then the other thing I would say is it's about then where does that intelligence come from? Well, the management capability in that example that I gave, there was most of the thought, the best practice came from externally. This is what we think good looks like. But in that sales example that I was giving, or a number of sales examples like that, actually the competence and best practice came from in the business. So then the evolution is constantly staying on top of who are the high performers, what are they doing differently, how are we capturing and sharing that with the rest of the team.
Yes, and it's almost like you're effectively building a movement, aren't you? Really, because you want more, you want to grow adoption, and you want the good stuff that you're feeding to be adopted, shared, taken up, and so a part of it is identifying those places where you're seeing new green shoots, for example. Yes, you can champion the consistent, the luminaries and what have you, but then also you kind of need to shine a light on some people who are demonstrating for the first time, perhaps, some great new behaviours which are absolutely bang on to what you're trying to achieve in the centre of excellence, and champion them, put a spotlight on them, possibly make them blush a little bit, but it creates a little bit of FOMO and around the rest of the organisation. Says, oh wow, okay, cool. So there is, we should do this. This is good, right, Lindsey?
Yeah. I think what you've both just described to me, it just reminded me of early on we had to create the conditions for getting that feedback. You know, too often you hear people say, oh yeah, you know, put teams in place, allow one-to-ones, allow group sessions for feedback. But it's all right saying that. I think it takes the leadership team to drive those conditions and make sure it's happening. And you know, we used to do some really lovely, just brought together a lot of the day to day. You do some lunch and learns, you help drive the learning that way. You make sure you sort of celebrate the successes that you talked about, Jules, on the day to day learning to keep that going. But also some really considered innovation sessions to get all the minds from across the markets together, so everyone had a voice, everyone had an idea, and we created that space for that innovation and thinking and learning away from the day to day as well. And we actually brought in some of the external parties and also the internal, if you like, consumers of that to make it happen. So I think, I mean, whatever works within an organization, or I think you've got to really give it some consideration and create the space for it, rather than just saying to people we're going to do it. You have to test and learn and try it and make it happen. And I think that for me is the important thing in anything around centres of excellence. Just shoving teams, groups and channels up there doesn't make it work. It will happen over time, but you've got to really push that and have some advocates to do that. And having people who will lead and champion it is really critical. So yeah.
Totally. I mean, yeah. I mean, I told you my story about ITV and leading the transformation for ITV News to go digital across its regional and national newsrooms. It wasn't a job involving air miles. It was, but if I had rail miles, I'd be platinum for life, because it was, you know, up and down to Carlisle, Plymouth, you know, Norwich, all over the place. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of miles on the road physically to get in to those places. You know, face-to-face stuff is also super important.
Yeah.
But that's a truism of all these sort of transformations. They require, it's just another aspect of transformation, isn't it? But it requires an astonishing amount of energy, and still in this world of you know, collaborative learning and all this kind of stuff, there's still quite a big part of top-down sponsorship and leadership involved as well.
Yes, yeah, and passion. Actually, I think you've got to have some really brilliant people in the group, in that leadership group, that really care, that really want to drive this forward, and are super animated about the subject matter, particularly for you know, the area we were in. I had a data scientist we used to call the Oracle, and she was so passionate about everything that, you know, you spent some time in the room, people could see the impact of what happens. And I really think showcasing those experts and the passion that they can bring can make a huge difference as well. So you know, giving those individuals the confidence to do that and provide that platform for them was really key. Yeah.
Paul, what would your 3 tips be for getting an organisation through what I love to call the messy middle of establishing something like this, where it's kind of, you know, you have to just inject some energy, keep it going, and feed it?
Well, it's interesting because I've seen, for me, it's all about how you have a central team of people that coordinate the initiative. And that can include coordinating the most senior stakeholders, to Lindsey's point about then and how they're driving the initiative and adoption of the initiative. But more importantly, it's interesting because this isn't what we're talking about, but as an example, compliance training, how much effort organizations make chasing their employees to complete compliance training. And what do the stats suggest? The stats suggest that people will find the quickest route through compliance training, having learned as little as possible in that process. You know, they just want to get through and get it done and move on.
Click. Kind of
click. Yeah, and you know, overall LMS adoption, the use of the stats at the moment, and there's obviously lots of research, but the stats suggest that about 17 to 24% of content within an LMS is actually used.
Just explain LMS, Paul.
Yes. So learning management systems. So lots of organisations, of course, have this digital repository of learning, and the research suggests that about 17 to 24% of that content is used. And in fact, I saw a company that had spent £1 million on a learning management system have to abandon it because it got filled up with so much content that it became a distraction. People couldn't find what they actually needed. However, what the research also suggests is that adoption, and when two things are true, one is when it's woven into real work, I'm just having a look at the research here, it's woven into real work, and people can see the direct impact on their career growth. So it's a genuine. Now, we've always talked about in learning and development the importance of relevance. Content has to be relevant to the individual. But that will be my top tips. By having someone that's actually orchestrating this, curating this, they're making sure that they can see that this content is genuinely woven into someone's work and is genuinely feeding and serving the individual's career growth. Then you've answered the biggest question, which is what's in it for me. I think that's probably the one area. If anything, I would say is underinvested in. People are very busy putting material into systems and going, look, we've got all this stuff, but actually, is it genuinely relevant? Is it being used? Well, the stats suggest not, but there's the research also suggests adoption is 80% or higher when it's relevant and when it's serving someone's career growth.
Yeah. And it comes back to that term editorship, doesn't it? Editing, curatorship, all that kind of stuff. Interesting. Okay, here's a thought. So we've talked about setting one up, we've talked about getting it running and getting it going and building momentum. I've got this crazy thesis that a centre of excellence's role is to make itself redundant, because if you've done that by definition, when the job of a centre of excellence is done is when you've inculcated this kind of learning, this culture of continuous improvement and learning in your organisation. It's kind of happening by itself. Thoughts? Do you agree? Am I wrong? Please disagree. It'd be more exciting.
Yeah, two schools of thought. One, is it ever done? Because it is always evolving. How do you make sure you keep on going? You keep that innovation, you keep that cadence with that? Because I think I've seen it work both ways. I've seen a centre of excellence go back into an organisation, so build it all up, develop it, and then move it back in. And very quickly, what happens? No one person is owning the strategy. No one person is owning the innovation. It gets lost within everything else in the melee of the business plan. So that capability then is fighting for other things. So I think there's a risk if you move it back that capability just then gets lost again. So unless it has somebody who can really champion and has the teeth within an organisation to really make it happen and fund it and drive it and develop it. So so from that perspective, I think it's high risk unless you put some of those other conditions back in place when it moves back the other way. I truly believe sometimes that if you take that focus away, you lose everything that can be built very quickly. So that probably more based on experience than what I've seen, I would say. But yeah, in that instance, yeah, it can be challenging.
We've got scars and medals talking at the same time there.
Yes.
Lindsey, very good. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Well, what do you think? I mean, is it possible? Because is it possible for an organisation? I suppose the logical kind of corollary of that is that you just end up having lots of centres of excellence and they keep on going, and actually and then multiple things you're focusing on, and that's almost impossible to do as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so two thoughts. I mean, so you talked there about, keep a centre of excellence going for long enough until learning is embedded part of the culture of an organisation. Well, I think we all know, frankly, that learning is already at the heart of every organisation. Whether or not it's orchestrated and controlled centrally is a different question, and whether it should be is an interesting question. But we know that most learning happens on the job. Most learning happens from mentorship, from making mistakes, from falling over, getting back up, etc. And what's interesting about a centre of excellence is it's almost like this external body, a centralised resource going, hey guys, we've got some useful stuff for you to use. And it ultimately leads to, I think, learning and development. The function of a learning and development team is their biggest dilemma. It's how do they stay relevant? How do they actually genuinely add operational value versus be this central team that is putting loads of stuff together and hoping someone uses it? So I personally think that organizations are already learning all the time. They have to be. But I also think that there's often a disconnect between how learning and development support that. And it goes back to the need for, and we've all heard the term business partnering. Somebody needs to be, as part of all of this that we've been talking about, somebody needs to be business partnering with the organization to go, what are the capability gaps? What's actually going to drive the results that we're looking for? And how do we as a central team help to capture what best practice looks like and help to make your lives easier in your leadership roles in getting the best out of your teams? But could that ever, as soon as you remove that business partnering piece, when that happens in a lot of learning and development functions, they exist in a silo away from the operation, and people go, well, what's the actual relevance of that team? And we see them constantly over the last few years, especially being cut as a result of that. But secondly, if you have good business partnering and they're genuinely able to demonstrate how they're able to drive better performance, better capability, then that will always be relevant. So I genuinely don't see a time, if that was happening properly and they were genuinely responding to the changing context, changing environment, then I would argue that that centre of excellence will always be needed because it's driving genuinely measurable results if it's done in the right way. And that will always need to evolve and change because the environment is always evolving and changing.
Very good, very
I
good.
suppose fundamentally the question there is who's the conscience for that discipline or that change, whether it be the business partner or a strategic leader within an organisation. It's who's got the conscience, who's got the budget, and who's able to make things happen. And if you've got those conditions in place, is a centre of excellence needed, but it needs that conscience, I think, to keep focus on, are we still doing what it needs to be doing as a discipline or capability?
Yeah. Interesting. Brilliant. Okay, well, listen, why don't we wrap things up by asking each of you what are your big kind of what are the things that what are the things you'd like to leave people thinking about as we go away and the challenge of a centre of excellence persists. How do we take that forward into the future?
Okay, so my top three takeouts will be just be clear what you are and what you aren't going to be if you're looking at a centre of excellence and capability. Be absolutely crystal clear on it. And be clear about what you're not going to do, because sometimes the scope of requirements can get too big and too unwieldy. So I think for me, focus is a really, really major part of it. The second one is whether you're doing this as business partnering in the business or whether you're doing it as an organisation, doesn't really matter. The whole thing is about trust that you're doing the right thing for the organisation and that the capabilities that you're bringing are going to be the best that they can be. And there's a lot of stakeholder management and people management to both two-way listening and also delivering what people expect as well. So trust is a massive part. Yeah, I suppose the third thing again is underpinned by trust, but just get the right people involved from the top, from the beginning, to support you. There can be some naysayers in organisations, so look out for those, get them on board, and just keep that dialogue going, because people is the biggest part of this change for me when I did it, and I think that's quite key. So yeah, focus on people.
Yeah, clarity, trust, and people. Very good,
Yeah.
Lindsey. Paul?
Yes, I think the first thing for me would be to really clarify the problem you're solving. Content isn't valuable for its own sake. What are we creating and what's the problem that it's solving? Be really clear on that. Secondly, then I'd suggest being really clear on where best practice lies. Is it within the organization? Is it outside the organization? And therefore, how do we define that? And then third point would be how you manage that change. And part of that, I would suggest, is starting small, building some success stories and using those success stories and the ROI that you get on the back of those success stories as your sales pitch back into the organization to say, look, we had this idea, this is the problem we're solving. We identified some people that were performing in a way that we like the rest of the team performing, and we've done some tests to see how we can capture what they're doing and get more people doing the same thing. And here's the results, and we think this is quite promising. So I think by starting small, demonstrating the results, it gets you the buy-in to then continue evolving.
Yeah. So yeah, and build that movement and don't give up too soon as well, right?
Yeah, it's a long game.
Yeah, very good, very good. Fantastic. Let's leave it there. There's plenty to be going on with. Lindsey Ulanowsky and Paul Goundry, thank you very much for joining us. Great little chat.